Shane, first of all, welcome. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to do this. If you're not familiar with this community, we're just a community of folks that, for one, appreciate what folks like you do by providing us with food, which I think is, you know, it allows us to do some of these other things that we all like to do. So thank you for that. And, you know, I always like to say that, you know, I think you guys are unsung heroes and extremely underappreciated. And, you know, so if no one else is telling you thank you, I'm saying that, and I think that I can speak for the community when I say that as well.
Well, much appreciated.
Yeah, no, certainly. With that in mind, would you give us a little background on yourself?
Yeah, I'm a farmer stockman located in northeastern Kansas, about 90 miles northwest of Kansas City. Grew up in production agriculture my entire life. A graduate of Kansas State University, animal science degree. I've done ran numerous businesses, along with trying to figure out production agriculture. And long story short, you know, I've started a lot of these regenerative practices many, many years ago, and slowly I've been self-educating myself and adapting more regenerative practices. And it's pretty amazing, you know, when we start working with nature about how we can impact, you know, not only ourselves financially, but also, you know, how we affect our landscapes and our animals.
Yeah, that is, I think, and the one point that you make, and I'm hearing this repeatedly from a lot of people in this regenerative, you know, agricultural world, and I've interviewed lots of them, is by and large, they say they're doing pretty well from a profit standpoint. I mean, they're able to make it profitable. They're cutting their inputs. They're figuring out how to maximize this. And I think as more people adopt it, as more knowledge is being distributed and acquired and shared, it becomes a little easier for the next guy. You know, you've got someone's shoulders to stand upon. It's almost as, you know, some of these things have been forgotten over time, and now we're relearning them and that type of stuff. So I think that's an important, you know, aspect for a lot of people that are considering doing this, because I know maybe yourself had hesitations because you thought, I'm going to go broke if I stopped doing things the sort of the traditional way. And so, reading a little bit about your bio, you're producing beef and eggs. Is that primarily
Yeah, we do grass finished beef. We do pasture eggs. We also have pasture pork now, along with pasture lamb. We also do honey production. So, you know, we started small. You know, I've always raised livestock. You know, we used to run about 300 head of mama cows. We've pared that down significantly. We've started adding, you know, diversity of other livestock, but we started small and we're slowly growing it bigger. We started direct marketing really 2 years ago. We've always sold beef off the farm, but, you know, now we're selling individual cuts. Most of our product is sold, you know, within the 30-mile radius of our operation. So as my kids are starting to gravitate, wanting to come back to the farm, they're wanting to kind of take more of a lead in doing the direct marketing. So that's kind of our goal, our vision. We really sat down this last summer, looked at cost structure, you know, what's it costing us, what's it costing for processing, so we know how to value our cuts. And the big thing is, I mean, the bottom line is we got to make money. We got to make a profit in order to stay in business. And because we don't take any financial, you know, we're not part of any government program. So we stay out of that realm. So we've really got to know what our costs are. And we've sat down, we've got all that really identified well. We feel very comfortable with it. We think we've kind of got a strategy where my oldest daughter can look at coming back home and helping really ramp up this direct marketing business. There's a demand out there for it, you know, but it's like anything. You got a learning curve. You got to get established and get through it first.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about it as, you know, hopefully, you know, we can get some business sent your way for people who might be listening to this down the road. We'll talk about that towards the end about how to do that. But, and I think it seems like that has to go almost hand in hand with the regenerative side, as it seems like the direct marketing is a big, or direct to consumer sales is a very significant part of that, or at least or maybe participating in a co-op or something. I know we have one member, I don't know if she's here now, Neethi, who helps a lot of farmers and ranchers with doing regenerative type stuff. When you had mentioned, what was I going to say there? Well, anyway, you say that, sorry, my dogs are going to bark for a second there. When you say that, hang on just a second. Sorry, I had to yell. There's somebody's probably walking through my backyard and they're getting excited. All right, so the direct market side, how long, when you started 2 years ago, did that make a huge difference to making this viable? How long have you been doing the regenerative stuff?
Well, regenerative stuff practices I've probably been doing for almost 15 to 18 years. So the direct marketing was just kind of the next step per se of trying to capture more value from our clientele. And one thing, it took me a long time, I mean, to start understanding as we start changing our soils, you know, as in the diversity of plant species and the microbiology within the soils, we can actually, you know, change the flavonoids of the proteins, you know, through the plant structure being consumed by the animals. And, you know, that was one of the biggest questions, or the biggest obstacle was there was a lot of people selling grass-finished product and grass-fed product. And, you know, how are you going to distinguish yourself? Because, you know, now we just go into kind of a commoditized market. Everybody's selling grass-finished. Well, in agriculture or any business, we see how fast we can get to the bottom, you know, of cost, you know, pricing. Well, we have to learn to distinguish ourselves. And once I kind of started putting the numbers together, and as in my own mind of, you know, I really can have a huge impact on what these flavors taste like on these proteins. Now that's something I can market. I can market a flavor. It's kind of like I was in the commercial sod business for 20 years. We grew turf type fescues, and you had to distinguish yourself. You either had to distinguish it as in, you know, the quality of your product, way it handled when you installed it, and in the form you shipped it out in. You had to separate yourself from everyone else. And this is something I think, you know, we've identified and we're striving pretty hard doing. But it's understanding how soils function and how diversity functions, going back to the principles.
Yeah, that's one thing, and I think we're going to have Jason Roundtree coming up in a few weeks, and he's done some work. And I've seen, you know, when you talk about grass-finished animals, I mean, there's a lot of difference in the nutrient content. I'm sure the flavor. I mean, one grass finish is not the same as the other, and then of course the marketing is very deceptive. The way the I guess whoever oversees that, the USDA, allows them to. You know, you can put grass finished on a product and it doesn't really mean what we think as a consumer think it means. Can you talk a little bit about the differences there?
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of some definitions out there about grass finished product. The manipulation, and that's what terminology I'm going to use, is too often you'll see people go out here and they'll buy, let's just say, some whey cows or open heifers, and they have no knowledge of their past history. And they'll bring these animals onto their operation, put them on grass, you know, for, you know, 90 days, and then process them and market them as a grass finished animal. I mean, is it manipulative? Yeah. I mean, in my personal viewpoint, yeah, when we have an open door policy here where our customers are able to come on our operation anytime they want. They can see the animals. They can see how we move these animals through the landscape. They can see what these animals are being fed. And we don't want deception. And I think that's something that's, you know, you have to be honest and you have to be forthcoming. And I think that's what kind of separates a lot of people, you know, in the direct marketing business is we're not afraid to show people how we do things and why we're doing it and letting them see that. And you know, I gave a farm tour, no, it's probably been a week and a half ago now. And I took them to a group of cattle. In fact, we moved a group of cattle so they could see how we moved the cattle from paddock to paddock. And one of the attendees, she goes, how do you know your cows are satisfied? And we did what we call a paddock within inside of a paddock, where we put a lot of impact in a very small area for a very short time. And there's probably 100 head of animals in that paddock. And I was able to walk into, and I'm talking, you know, something maybe a little larger than a tenth of an acre, and walk through each one of those animals and put my hand on almost every one of their backs and their calmness, their disposition. And that's what I try to explain to people. We can tell, and I learned this from some ranchers in Mexico, disposition has a lot to go back to of how well nutritionally balanced you are. And I don't care if that's in animals, if that's in humans, or where that's at. And now when you see an animal that's calm and peaceful, that's telling you, they're pretty well nutritionally balanced. And that's a very positive thing for me. That my animals are able to select. We've got the diversity of plant species they need to satisfy their nutrient needs and to be productive on it.
I think that's a great point you bring up, and we do see that with humans. I think we can all relate to mood being related to what we're eating, and I guess if you want to use disposition as a proxy for mood in cows, I mean, obviously you don't want to be dealing with some 800-pound animal that's pissed off all the time. So I mean that has its own self-protection I guess values as well. But is there some degree of, because you're in Kansas and there may be somebody in Alberta and there may be somebody in New Zealand or Brazil or Mexico or Texas where we got so many cattle and the forage available is different. Do you think I guess we've kind of, the rancher says, well, I want Black Angus cattle because they sell a lot or whatever, and they stick them in a place that may not be environmentally suited to them. Is there some thought as to, can nature select for the type of cow, or do we have to alter the environment for the cows we put on there?
No, nature will select. And, I made a comment earlier, we used to have close to 300 head of mama cows. And there was a lot of supplementation. We did a lot of supplementation to those animals to keep them very productive. That's a very large cost on our books. And a lot of times, supplementation feed costs for livestock alone is about 60% of a producer's cost. So, it's not so much the, quote unquote, the breed type or anything. It's developing the epigenetics, with your environment. So when we stopped doing a lot of supplementation to our cows, the cows identified themselves pretty rapidly. They didn't breed back. They started losing condition. And as those animals started to identify themselves, we marketed them. And so now we've got a herd. That's pretty tough when I say that. As a passion for agriculture and definitely the passion for beef production, which I've loved my entire life. And I've followed the textbook of doing EPDs and, proper feeding. And you watch 2/3 of your cow herd leave and you're trying to move them down this regenerative path. That's a pretty tough pill to swallow. But what we've built is resiliency now into our animals. We've built the epigenetics, we are building the epigenetics within our herd of animals that can survive in my environment. Right now, my cows, we got a group of cows right now. We got snow on the ground. It's about 30 degrees, and I just went and checked them prior to this meeting, and they're out there foraging on some very highly lignified vegetation. They're taking that highly lignified and turning it into protein, keeping themselves, their body temps up. But, we've got to understand the importance of this. As I stated earlier, it all goes back to the soil. And we need those animals to be able to utilize some of those lignified materials because we need that animal to trample a lot of that vegetation down to protect the soil surface and to turn that into, take that vegetation and turn it into a protein. And it's the way the system was built and making the system work. And, we can mask a lot of things, by supplementation and stuff, but now we've got an animal that can work in our environment that doesn't cost us. It's reduced a lot of our cost and production. And, we can make money now. And that's a huge component. And we're building a sensuous product in the process.
Just for those people that aren't familiar with the term, lignification, or as my understanding is it becomes really tough and woody and it's not soft. Is that?
Yes,
that correct?
and that's
Correct on that?
correct. And I guess, I mean, now you're gonna get me into my microbiology world, but you know, we know one thing that's really missing a lot of our agricultural soils or most soils is the fungal component. And it takes the fungal component to break down that highly lignified material. So, you know, when those animals are out there consuming that more lignified vegetation, it changes the rumen itself. So it gets to be a stronger fungal component. So what's coming out of the back end of the cattle is going to be more fungal. So we're dispersing that fungal component through our soils as we do adaptive grazing techniques. But also it's going to promote more fungal on the vegetation itself in order for the decomposition process to work. And back into going from immobilization to mineralization back into the soil. I mean, bacteria can't do that. It takes the fungal component to get that achieved.
Yeah, and speaking of the science, I mean, there was I guess in some, and you may be familiar, there was a recent documentary on TV called Kiss the Soil or something
Kiss
like
the
that.
ground.
Kiss the Ground. And it kind of highlights the need for, regenerative type of animals and how important the soil is. And I've had many people on to corroborate that. And yet there are people that are still very much opposed to this and saying it's not doable, it's not scalable. In fact, there was an article produced called Grazed and Confused. I think it was put out by I can't remember the organization that did that, but it was a fairly large organization of range scientists saying that these claims being made by guys like Alan Savory and other ones are overblown, and it's not going to help. And even if you get the soil restored, it's just a finite amount, and then you're back to square one, and we need to just give up animal agriculture. How do you respond to that? I mean, I've heard other people's response saying that the data they're using is not based on, actual data that we're seeing now, and so on and so forth. So how does one respond to that criticism of regenerative agriculture, or can you respond to that?
Oh, I'd be more than glad to respond to it. So I guess they're disputing animal agriculture, that if we can, first thing is, most soils don't function the way soils should function. And we got to go back to the water cycle. And the only way you fix the water cycle is by having diversity of plant species, proper resting periods of vegetation, perennial forages, and the grazing aspect. That's how you start fixing the water cycle. I know a lot of people think that we need to build, we need to do these high carbohydrate production systems, corn, soy. It's very easy, but when you start questioning, you start looking at the core issues. I mean, look at the algal blooms we have in the Gulf of Mexico on an annual basis. I mean, that's coming from excess nutrients running off of these landscapes. The reason why we have these major flooding events along the Missouri and Mississippi River is due to the fact we don't infiltrate water in these soils like we once did. The only way we're going to fix this, the only way is start implementing regenerative practices by getting animals back on these landscapes. Because when an animal grazes something, it sends out a whole brand new chemistry stimulus to that plant to pump more carbon back into the soil to feed the microbiology in order for the microbiology to go get the nutrients the plant needs. And it's that relationship that's got tens of thousands of years of research and development behind it. I mean, unfortunately, most scientists look at things in a reductionist model, that they just look at their expertise and how their expertise can fix something, but they don't look at the unintended consequences of that science down the road 10, 20, 30 years later. And that's what's happened a lot in agriculture. We use a lot of reduction scientists or science. We didn't look at how it affected the whole system. And now we kind of got ourselves in this conundrum now of, why do we have all this water runoff? Why do we have all these nutrient runoff? Well, we stopped understanding how the principles work. And these principles can be applied on any landscape. That's the beautiful part about it. It's not like it's just a one region where this is going to work. This works everywhere. And It's a win-win-win situation, not only for, producers, consumers. It's a win for everybody. If taxpayers aren't paying to have flood mitigation, the billions of dollars we're spending right now repairing the levees along the Missouri River, think about that. If we infiltrated, 1% more water in these landscapes, which we need is hydration, how many billions of economic dollars are we saving? If these wastewater treatment plants aren't having to put in new cleaning devices to clean the water, how many billions of dollars are we saving? I mean, these are things as producers we can remedy.
Yeah, and and that is something. It's people do become very reductionist when they're looking at costs. When they're looking at, for instance, improving their diet, they're saying, well, I can't afford to eat this, but then they don't include all the added costs or savings that occur when they eat the incorrect foods and stuff. But you had mentioned earlier that you're not participating in any kind of government reimbursement program. Would it be helpful if there were some sort of government support of what you do? If there was some sort of incentive, or at least maybe not a disincentive to do that? Is that something that, we're about to elect another president, another, group of,
8 days.
another group of politicians that'll make us a bunch of promises and probably don't do anything, is what just per usual. I think we all have to kind of rely on ourselves more or less. But if there were, because we do have an agricultural system, USDA strongly supports, that is based on, a subsidy system, particularly with some of those grain crops you talked about. So, is there a way that you think we could potentially legislate or at least improve the livelihood of guys like you through tax dollars, through voter efforts? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, you're opening up a can of worms here. I don't think it's legislation. It takes education. I think it's going to take the consumer dollar driving this. Let's look at it. What has policy done for us? And I'm going to use my watershed here for an example. We drain about 700,000 acres of our watershed into one lake. And that lake was built in the late 60s. And the sedimentation basin was about early 60s or 2060s is when it's supposed to have filled up with sedimentation. We have spent millions and millions and millions of dollars putting in terraces, buffer strips. Our sedimentation load is still in excess of where it should be. And my point is, we've tried to use engineering to fix this problem. And it's not engineering we need, it's education is what we need. And this goes back to the fixing the water cycle. Growing up, even with myself when I was going through high school, we was taught about terraces, about how we need to engineer to channel water, to divert water off of our fields. We were never taught how do we infiltrate water back into our systems. How do we keep a living root in the soil at all times? How do we properly graze animals through these landscapes? How do we keep these soils covered? How do we keep minimal disturbance? It's got a good track history. If you look at how government intervention policy, government spent a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars, trying to help producers pay for cover crop seed, pay for fencing, water structure. And I think some statistics that I've seen, it's less than 10% once the government pays for the initial cost, continue the education or continue the practice once their contract's up. That's pretty horrible results. That's the thing, like ourselves with Soil Health Academy and Understanding Ag, is we're the educational component. And once we get guys to understand and to kind of coach them of how to implement, how to take that learning curve and make it more of a straight line, the success rate in the guys' implementation is, I don't know the statistics to it. We need to sit down and do that. But I guarantee it's well over 85 to 90%. Because these conversations you and I are having here and your audience, most people have never heard this before. And it almost sounds too simple to be true. But when you go back and see how the system was built, and all we have to do is learn how to mimic some of those processes back into our production models, it makes it pretty simple. And, and we look at everything as a financial aspect. How do we get producers to understand to adopt no-till practices? How do we get producers to understand the significance of keeping those living roots and diversity of living roots into the soil? And, there is a little bit of a transition, and it takes education to get these guys to build confidence. And when we approach a lot of our clients, we encourage them just to test the practices on a small portion of their farm. Don't try to go do the whole farm at once. Do it on small acreage and build that confidence. Start utilizing the power of observation. What are you seeing? What's it telling you? And start interpreting. That's how, we go about it. We have tremendous success with this. But trying to go out here and legislate, trying to, that's, we have not seen that be successful as of yet. And unfortunately, it's usually being implemented by people who we call experts. And, this goes back to our reductionist models. And I think it really needs to go back to education. How do we educate producers? How do we go out here and, as a consumers, find these producers who are doing these regenerative practices, and if they are direct marketing, try to purchase from them. I mean, that's where the consumers can help the most.
And this is, and I don't know if you care to talk about this or not, but I kind of saw some kind of back and forth going from some different regenerative agriculture guys saying, hey, we're not really excited about the fact that we've got people that are charging us to verify us. Like we have to participate and pay all this money for someone to say my land is verified that I'm a regenerative style agriculturist. And, I don't need that. I mean, what are your thoughts on the verification? Because I know Savor Institute has a verification process, and I imagine there's some other ones on there. And then there's other folks saying, hey, why do I need to pay for certification verification? Do you think that is a valid argument, or is there concern about that?
It's like anything else. I think once you start doing certifications, you go down a slippery slope. It's kind of like organic. Organic, I think, started off the right way, and it's gotten kind of misconstrued and misrepresented, and that's what I'm fearful about regenerative agriculture, trying to put labeling on stuff and trying to set up some type of a means. Do I think it's going to come someday? Probably, but I'm cautious of it, extremely cautious of how it's identified, how the terminology is used. And that's the reason why it's, also incumbent upon the consumers to educate themselves. So when they go visit someone's operation or they go to a farmer's market, they kind of know what kind of questions to ask. I mean, how are these animals being raised? I mean, how do you do your grazing? How do you do identify a pasture egg to me, and, kind of question some of those people. And, I'm fearful of trying to label anything, because it can be gamed, it can be misrepresented, and that's the unfortunate part.
Yeah, I want to. We a lot of times talk about how animals are reared, and whether we mob graze, holistic graze, adapt to multi-paddock graze. There's a lot of terms for this. Basically it comes to management and soil management, but we don't talk much about like you said. You talk about cover crops, and many of us, what is a cover crop, for instance? How do we sort of, because not everybody's going to eat only meat. I mean, in this group, a lot of people just eat just meat, but there's going to be people that are going to eat both. How do we improve the entire agricultural system so we can get away, because so much of the, like you mentioned, corn and soy and wheat is done monocrop style with huge intensive inputs when it comes to herbicides or pesticides, and how can we manage those aspects as well to also improve the soil and the biodiversity?
Well, real quick, policy, that's what's driving the corn and soy. There's a lot of government policy, insurance programs. And I do want to acknowledge something real quick. I have in the past taken some government subsidies, and I want to make that clear. And I haven't taken any since 2015. And they were very small amounts when I did take them. So I want to clarify that. But it's going back to the policy, but some things are going to kind of fix themselves. I mean, as technology gets better and they get the cost of cellulosic ethanol production where they can take a lot of waste streams and make ethanol out of that, that's going to harm the ethanol industry and the corn. I mean, right now, 43% of our corn production goes to ethanol, goes to fuel. With the shale revolution, and the Dakotas, I mean, now as a nation, we are energy independent. We're no longer, concerned with foreign imports. That's coming to kind of it's going to phase itself out. What I'm saying is as technology permits and cellulosic ethanol becomes more and more cheaper to produce, and we can take waste streams and produce it, that's really going to have a negative impact on corn production. And, as we know, there's mandates out there, saying that the refiners got to blend so much ethanol into the fuel. So I think that's going to happen. That's going to hurt some of it. And in regards to protein complex like soybeans, right now, we've got this, quote unquote trade deal with China. I guess most people probably don't look at demographics, geopolitical stuff. I do, unfortunately. I think we've really got to question some of our largest buyers, how much longer they're going to be in the market buying from us. Right now our largest importer of agricultural goods is Mexico, and it's not China, as a lot of people perceive. And I mean, right now they're in the market buying pretty large right now because they had major torrential flooding in their nation this year. So that's the reason why you've seen soybean prices spike up. But I think some of it's going to self-correct itself in a long story here. But it's going to take some changes in policy and to get some things corrected. But the best thing we can hope for right now is trying to educate producers to start adapting these principles, trying to keep a living root in the soil. So once you take a production crop off, try to get in there with a cover crop so we can capture some of those soluble nutrients that was left over from the production crop, get that back in the plant biomass. And then in the coming spring, take those nutrients that are now in the plant biomass, which would be called immobilized, tied up into this plant, and get that, back down on the soil surface so we can get it back to mineralization, cycle those nutrients back through the next growing crop. And this is where producers can start saving a lot of dollars on synthetic inputs. Once they start to get the soil function again, we start cycling our nutrients back. And that's where a lot of producers start seeing, some pretty good benefits. And we got some really good tools out there. We got soil tests now called the Haney Soils Test that we can measure this. How much soluble nitrogen is plant available do we have in our soil solution? But this takes testing. This is where we encourage producers to take these tests, take a piece of your farm ground, reduce by the Haney rate, but do your normal application everywhere else. But when we harvest, let's see which one made more money. Let's look at net dollars. And almost inevitably, where they did the reduction, they made more money.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about, you said you started out with 300 head of cattle, and then you selected for some that are going to be robust for where you're at, and then you incorporate other animals. What does that do to and I don't know what kind of metrics you use, but I'm just saying like something like protein per acre, amount of protein you can produce per acre, or fat per acre, or whatever kind of nutrition per acre. Does that, by mixing the animals in there, are you able to ultimately produce more, in that same area of grass than you could if you were to tightly manage the same animal, like I said, more cows or more sheep or whatever?
Yeah, we can. I mean, I haven't quantified it that way as of yet. I mean, I still look at net dollars per acre. I'd have to do that equation. We are starting to build our cow herd back up. So there's a few things we had to identify. Now, when we did that reduction of the cow numbers, we knew we had to reduce anyhow. That's the reason we got pretty hard on the cows, because we were overstocked for the amount of forages and the amount of grassland I own, my wife and I. And so we knew we had to destock. So that was kind of one of the, I guess, quote unquote, test questions. We had to challenge these cows, and if they could pass by, coming back bred, I mean, they got to stay, and the ones who didn't left. But we had to destock. We had to let our grasslands get some rest period in order to start building back. So it wasn't just one matrix. I mean, there were several things going on in the process. We identified we desperately needed rest. We identified that we needed an animal that can utilize the forages we have and be productive. So there were several things that were going on as we was doing this transition process with the animals. But right now we're growing, I'm trying to think, without any supplementation for what we're doing, I mean, yeah, we're probably comparable to growing as much protein without supplementation we ever have. Now we will have to supplement. We will get at points in time because we're just not all the way there yet. There's going to come points in times we're going to have to do some supplementation, as in feed and hay to our animals during this winter period.
Yeah, and I think that's, and I don't know how, like you said, you've got some heritage pigs and chickens and how they do out in the snow pecking through to get food. I mean, I know I had a bison group from South Dakota, Dakota Pure Bison, I believe, and they said those animals were pretty well adapted to foraging all through the winterland. Wintertime, that's kind of what they were bred for.
Now our animals, I mean, like the pigs and the chickens, they do get some starch component. They get fed, a little bit of corn, non-GMO corn. So they need an energy component. They also get fed, seed cleanings, screenings. We got a small seed cleaner we clean seed with, and they will get fed that. So basically we can take the waste stream of one enterprise, cleaning seed, and we can feed that back into our livestock, of the pigs and the chickens. Now the sheep and the cattle, they don't get any grains, no.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously traditionally certainly with pigs, I know, and chickens, they kind of eat just about damn near anything, it seems like.
Well, I mean, that's what's kind of incredible. I grew up, I raised feeder pigs when I was in high school and college, and we always, we fed them. I mean, they were dry lot fed. And, as being an agriculturalist, and, when I started moving the pigs, grazing them, moving them, every 5 days or every 7 days, depends on the paddock size. There was a lot of times I'd sit out there for 20, 30 minutes, just watch the pigs forage. And it was kind of mind blowing, watching what they went and selected, what they ate, and how much of their diet they would forage. And it's very humbling as a producer, thinking to myself, why wasn't I thinking about this, or, 25, 30 years ago? Well, and part of it is, we've got technology now. I mean, our technology, but tools like polywire that makes things so much easier. And 25 years ago, 30 years ago, all we had was, metal wire. And I don't know if you've ever messed with metal wire before, hot wire, but it's not an easy thing to handle and move and manipulate on a daily basis.
I guess there's that sort of thought that technology is bad, but it can be utilized to this regenerative stuff in a very effective way. I know a lot of people use a poly braid to, put up and down fences real quick, and it can turn a 4 or 5 hour task into something that can be done in 30 minutes or something like that. I mean,
it's incredible. I mean, it's the poly reels and the poly wire and the tread-in post. Yeah, I mean, we can build a paddock for a group of animals in a matter of minutes and get accomplished what we want accomplished, and there's no headaches. And I think that's where we got to get things to, where it's headache free. And because if it's headache free, you're willing to do it. If you got to go out there and fight something every day, I mean, then that becomes a challenge, and people don't like doing that.
Yeah, I've seen, even as much as people talking about using satellite imagery to sort of plan their moves, and they can kind of, I don't know if they can assess the soil from the ground or from the sky. I'm not sure what the exact. I don't know if you have any more insight than I kind of briefly heard a year or two ago. But it seems like there's been it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem like this regenerative movement is growing in both scope, number of practitioners, and I guess more people are willing to get out there and talk about it. Is that fair to say that there's more of you guys than there was 10 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. The enthusiasm towards regenerative agriculture is, just mind blowing. We just put a soil health academy on in Marion, Alabama. We were sold out of students. We had a waiting list. As our organization, we get people emailing daily wanting to know how to implement regenerative practices on their farms or ranches. And I'm talking, I'm talking anywhere from a couple acres to 500,000 to 1,000,000 acres. I mean, there's starting to become an awareness, and I think instincts are kind of kicking into a lot of human nature, saying, we're seeing something we never knew how to address or answer the question of what we were seeing and why it was occurring, and is there another way? And that's probably one of the roadblocks that I had for many years. I mean, even growing up as a kid, now you got to remember, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I mean, I grew up on the fender of a tractor. And when I was old enough to start operating that equipment, that's what I did. And I'll never forget, you sat there and you would do tillage for 12, 14 hours a day because that's what you had to do. You had to prepare a seed bed. And then if that wasn't bad enough, once we had the crop planted, we would cultivate it, cultivate that crop 2 to 3 times throughout the growing season. And if you've ever ran a 6-row cultivator at about 1.5 miles an hour all day, every day, I mean, you sat there and you start asking questions. Why are we doing this? But nobody had an answer, and nobody had a different way. It's like when no-till came along in the 80s here in our part of the world, it wasn't adopted very easily because we didn't have the chemistry to combat a lot of the broadleaves. But, when I really got to farming on my own in the early 90s, about the same time Roundup came out, I thought all I need is a sprayer and a no-till piece of equipment. I can farm a lot of acres by myself. Wouldn't be spending all that time discing ground or, cultivating. And this is what it goes back to unintended consequences. And that's the reason why we now have, weeds that are resistant to the herbicide Roundup, is because we over applied it. Mother Nature said, I'm going to combat this. And I mean, but now we've got an understanding why it occurs. I mean, Mother Nature's growing a broadleaf because Mother Nature knows the importance of getting the soil covered. Mother Nature knows the importance of feeding that soil microbiology. And we, as producers, sit there and we fight it on a daily basis. And if we start to understand why it's occurring, how can we adapt things into our production models, like the principles, so we start working with it instead of against it? That's when it starts, the cogs start connecting and the wheels start turning. And that's one thing. When I was early on, I started doing cover crops in 2002. And that was a radical concept, but I was growing it because I needed feed for livestock. It wasn't until I started understanding carbon to nitrogen ratios and, continually self-educate myself that all this started making more and more sense. I was just mimicking the processes that were already established.
Yeah, can you just describe a little bit more detail the cover crop process? What is the actual point of that? Are the animals directly eating those crops, or what's going on with the cover crops?
Okay. Well, cover crop is basically a crop that's planted in between production crops. It's kind of a vague definition of it. So let's say a producer takes out a corn production crop. They'll come in with hopefully a diverse mix of covers. A lot of times there'll be biennials or some legume components and some broadleaf. They'll drill that into aerial apply that into their cornfield. And then if we get germination and we get good growth, then we can bring animals into that landscape to graze that. So basically, as a producer, I can look at an economic return from a grazing aspect from vegetating on those cover crops. Now, the cover crops are more than that. The cover crops are capturing sunlight, taking that photosynthesis, putting carbon back in the soil and the vegetative growth. And it's also also feeding this very diverse, array of microorganisms in the soil. Because you remember, that carbon that we're sequestering in the plant vegetation, that's not all going to the plant vegetation. A lot of plants give up a lot of that carbon to feed the soil microbiology. And it's the soil microbiology that has this symbiotic relationship of the plant sends out the chemical signal saying, hey, I need some calcium today. Well, there's microbiology in the soil that can capture that calcium, give it to the plant, but in return, the plant needs to give it some carbon, photosynthesis. And so we've got that dynamic occurring too, and that's what starts building what we call micro and macro aggregates in our soil. That's what starts sequestering nutrients in our soils, going from immobilization to mineralization. But we've got that living root through the non-growing season. So once the producer gets ready to plant their next vegetative crop or next production crop, that cover crop's still out there growing. Now we've got guys that are allowing it to grow to the point of what we call antithesis, which means we can come in here with a mechanical roller and we can crimp that cover crop and terminate it, so it saves the producer having to use a herbicide pass, when they're planting their crop. We're starting to understand how we allow these cover crops to get to a certain carbon to nitrogen ratios, then terminate them, then cycling those nutrients at the appropriate time for the next production crop so we can start reducing synthetic nutrients for the production crop. So the cover crop is more than just, we can take very array of economic opportunities from a cover crop. We can look at grazing, we can look at nutrient cycling, we can look at capturing photosynthesis and, putting carbon in the soil. We can look at, the nutrient cycling, I think I've already alluded to, but there's a lot of things we can look at. So that's how nature worked. Nature always had a living root in the soil. She always had a perennial system. And that's all we're trying to do with the cover crops is take that mimic that process of the production crop is harvested, now get that living root back in the soil, take the opportunity to put some diversity in there, a different plant species. Then we can look at economic gains through either grazing or nutrient cycling or herbicide reduction with these cover crops. Or all the above.
The point you made earlier was, you're seeing a lot of people switch over to this and they're seeing improvements. I mean, I see that I often use the analogy of what you guys are doing in the agriculture is kind of what many of us in the sort of healthcare space have kind of gotten away from all the pills and prescriptions, which, we could kind of draw analogies between pesticides and herbicides. And it's kind of what we're doing to ourselves with the pharmacology that we do. What is since you made this switch or over time, what has been your relationship with farming? I mean, quality of life, level of satisfaction and happiness relative to maybe when you were participating in a sort of more standard commercial and heavily industrialized form of agriculture, if you ever did?
Well, I mean, I love what I do. I mean, I've always loved agriculture. And as I alluded to earlier, my passion is production agriculture. But I can truly tell you, I love what I do every day. I mean, I get to go out and I get to watch life, and it's the daily observations I get to observe. It's either going out into a perennial grassland and seeing a new species of either grass or a forb, something emerging in my system, and sitting there wanting to know why that occurred, how did that occur. When I sat there and as I talked about earlier, when I can walk through a group of cattle and I can see their dispositions very calm and they're very relaxed, I mean, that's very rewarding. And as producers, and I think as society, we're so driven and we're wanting, instantaneous results, and I do too personally myself, but sometimes you got to understand we're working with an ecology, and sometimes things just don't happen overnight, and you need a little good fortune. You need a rain every once in a while to get the system functioning. But you've got to be intentional, and you've got to apply the principles, and it will come. It will happen. And some environments it's going to happen much more rapidly than others. But if you're not intentional, you're never going to get anything to happen. And that's something I use that when I talk. You know, early on, I probably wasn't, I was being intentional-ish. I wasn't being intentional. And finally in 2015, you know, I became extremely intentional. And it's just amazing to me of the consequences of that and the explosion of diversity we're seeing. And going back to my quality of life, as I said also, you know, I was in the production sod business for 20 plus years. And I was a contractor. So I was a contractor running a sod farm and plus farming, you know, a couple hundred acres and a lot of cattle. You know, I was, pardon my words, but hell on wheels. I mean, I was constantly running 100 miles an hour. And there probably wasn't much of a home quality of life, you know, probably a little bit of disputes every once in a while with me and my wife. Now my wife and I, you know, we go out on the side by side and basically I call it pasture date. We go out and we drive and I get to identify, you know, what new flowering species I'm seeing or different plant vegetation. And, you know, I'm a lot happier person. I mean, I'm not stressed all the time, you know, feeling obligations that, you know, I created on myself. You know, a lot of times in agriculture with any business, you know, we create our own financial distress. You know, we become obligated to a debt. We don't know how we're going to get out from underneath sometimes because things don't go our way. And that's kind of one of the other things with this regenerative agriculture. We've reduced our overhead tremendously and we've gotten rid of a lot of that debt. And I've taken, as I call them, nooses off my neck. And it's a lot easier to walk when you don't have a noose on your neck and being, you know, financially obligated to somebody.
Yeah, I hear that over and over. You know, it's just that people that like go from industrial farm feedlot operation to a more regenerative center, they just say their happiness goes up. You know, they get out of debt pretty quickly, and you know, sometimes it's a couple of years, but it seems to turn around, and they tend to say they enjoy what they do. Whereas, you know, as you know, many ranchers and farmers are stressed out. You know, they're living day to day financially. They've got a tremendous debt burden. They have a stressful life. We have, unfortunately, high suicide rates among our, you know, farmers and ranchers, which I think is probably due no small part to all the stress they're under. And so it's good to have, you know, not just for the health of the environment, but for the health of the practitioners as well, which I think is important. Let me ask you, because we have a little bit of time remaining, I want to ask you about your specific farm. What kind of products do you have available? When are they available? How are they available? Are they available across state lines? You know, I know it depends on, because you're in Kansas, I don't know what the law, I know each state has a little bit of individual difference on how much what type of product you can ship across state lines. But tell us a little bit about what you have available for consumers and how do we go about getting some if we wanted some?
Okay. Well, our direct marketing business is called Taste of the Land. And I came up with that, you know, as I alluded to earlier, once I had discovered we can influence the flavors of our proteins, and it all comes back from the function of soil. So, but yeah, we do individual cuts of about anything you can think of on beef. Same way with pork. We are getting ready to harvest our first lambs here in the next 2 weeks. Our pasture eggs are available, and so is our honey. Right now, the processors I'm currently using are only state inspected. We're working with them at the present moment to try to get back to federal inspection. You know, unfortunately, COVID-19 threw a monkey wrench into a lot of stuff. These processors got overwhelmed overnight with inventory needing to be processed. So like the gentleman I work with, which I have an awesome processor, it's delayed some of the business moves he's wanting to make, as in getting the federal inspection accomplished. I visit with him often. It sounds like he's going to get that accomplished here the next, hopefully, a couple months. It's a separate kill facility. So once we have the federal inspection in place, right now I can sell within the state of Kansas, but I can't ship outside the state. So we're hoping within the next 4 to 6 months, we'll have our federal inspection so we can ship outside the state. And with my daughter coming back, that's one of the big things, is getting, you know, so we can send out weekly orders. So hopefully in the next few months, we'll have a website up, laying out all of our product, our pricing, and where we can ship out on a weekly basis. So, like I said, we're got a learning curve we're getting through with this direct marketing. Most of our product sells locally, and that's very exciting to me. That people within, 2 or 3 miles of my home want to buy our product. They like it. And but the big thing is, like anything else, we've got to keep product leaving.
Yeah, let me just to further, because you said you can affect the flavor of the protein. I assume the flavor of the fat is affected as well. I mean, we know fat provides a lot of flavor in a lot of the cuts of meat that we like to eat. How would you describe? I mean, if you could, I mean, how is what you feed them and what you feed them, and how does that directly impact the flavor profile? I know you talked about a little bit about carotenoids, and I assume that's in somewhere in the forage you're feeding them, but how does that exactly affect the flavor profile?
Oh, great question. Well, first thing is the diversity of plant species. So our animals have a tremendous amount of diversity of plants they can then go forage on. Most animals or ruminants will consume, 2 to 3 grass species, but they'll take a bite of almost 50 other types of plants. And that's what helps balance their diets. That's what helps, produce a lot of the flavonoids. But it's also having very healthy plants, so we have more complete proteins inside those plants that our animals are getting to ingest, take in. So we're building these biomolecules that are needed not only for the animal, but also for ourselves. We're doing some research with some major universities with this at the present moment, and hopefully sometime in the near future we can share those findings, but it's pretty incredible. I know one of our recent farm tours, we cracked open some of our pasture eggs, and it came from an organization that they're heavily invested in the egg industry. They could not believe the color of our yolks. They couldn't believe how strong our yolks were, how well they held together. And they were wanting to know what we were feeding them. What special thing, what was our feed mix? Well, they have a lot of diversity of plants they get to forage on. They get, a little bit of corn. It's a pretty simple diet. But they couldn't believe, the quality we had from that. But it all goes back to building healthy soils so our plants can be healthy, so our animals can be healthy, and we as a civilization can be healthy. I mean, this is something, I know you guys are very well aware of this, but look at, we lead the industrial world in, all these chronic diseases. You got to sit there and start asking questions. Why is this occurring? And I think until we start addressing the core issues, we're never going to identify things. And that's my goal. I want to build the most nutrient-dense product I can build for my family and my consumer.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that. I mean, there's, like I said at the beginning, many of us appreciate that and wish you all the success, and hopefully we can support you, in Kansas, and hopefully if you get a federal processor in there that can help you get, ship over state lines, or if they change the laws. I don't know if the laws ever
I
get
think
passed.
there is. I'd have to look. I know there was some stuff changed during COVID-19. And be honest with you, I haven't stayed up with that. I'm running a pretty hectic schedule right now, doing soil health academies and just taking care of the farm when I do get back. And we're direct marketing, pretty much everything we're bringing in. So I really haven't, looked into that probably the way I should, because like I said, most of our product sales here locally. And it's not that I don't want to sell product out of state. I sure do. But, we're trying to figure out how do we keep ramping this up. We're looking to start farrowing our own hogs this coming year. So once we start doing that, we'll have more of a supply chain, of animals to finish for the port. The beef we can ramp up really fast. That's not an issue. But it's kind of like the lamb. How can we ramp that up and manage it and, make it so it's not a burden? So it's all extremely doable. One of the exciting things we're really going to be looking at vegetable production next year. We really think that's something we need to move into within our operation. And so we've got a lot of exciting things we're looking at. We're playing around with the product. We made our last processing of beef. We did a 5% liver, 25% fat, and a 70% lean burger. Very, very nutrient dense. It's got great flavor to it. So we're always looking at new product of how to add value, create nutrient density within the foods. So it's exciting. I mean, this is the fun part about what I do now is I'm running the show. I'm the one that's making decisions. I mean, I'm the one out here trying to compete for the consumer dollar. And I'm trying to figure out, what does my consumer want? What do I need to do to provide that to my consumer? I mean, we've got 3 different selections in our ground beef. We've got a 70-30, we've got a 80-20, we've got a 90-10. And it just blows my mind, how much 70-30 product we move, because people love the taste. And I mean, but those are things we're identifying. And, okay, so when we process the next group of animals, how much goes to 70-30? Do we still do 90-10? I mean, you're constantly thinking. And that's what I like. I like to think.
Yeah, I think, certainly, there's different diet tribes out there, I guess, or people that tend to go on these lower carb diets because they need to get their energy from somewhere. So they tend to opt for the more fattier types of food. So the 70-30, and I've seen places even go as low as 50-50, which is that's pretty tough to keep that stuff together, but interesting. Well, Shane, like I said, thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy.
Yep.
Your website you mentioned, I believe. Can you mention that again for me?
Yeah, I haven't even visited our website for a long time, but there used to be a website called New Family Farms. I'm not sure if my daughter maintains it still or not, but I know we've got a Facebook following, and that's New Family Farms, Holton, Kansas. And that's all going to get refreshed and done. My daughter, my oldest one, she's got her master's degree in marketing. She's currently a coach. She's starting junior high basketball, but once she gets done with her obligation for coaching junior high basketball, she'll be back, and Dad'll be on her pretty hard about getting stuff up to date and getting stuff back to rolling again.
Well, if you're okay with that, we would love to put a link to your stuff on our website for our members, at least the ones we have in Kansas right now. Just maybe have your daughter send that to us, and then we can get that updated.
If some of your listeners are interested in knowing more about regenerative agriculture, I really encourage you to go check out Understanding Ag or the Soil Health Academy. My partners and I, Gabe Brown, Ray Archuleta, and Dr. Alan Williams, we're the teaching branch of the Soil Health Academy. We do a tremendous amount of consulting throughout North America. And but we try to post a lot of information. We put on monthly webinars talking about regenerative agriculture. So I really encourage consumers to self-educate themselves and know what's going on out there.
Yeah, well, thank you again for doing that. And I've interviewed Alan a couple of times. I need to probably talk to Gabe and Ray Archuleta at some point, get those guys and just
those are the rock stars.
Well, I mean, it's great. I think you guys are all rock stars. I think it's it's something that just keeping this fresh in people's mind, and more exposure is more minds changed, or at least open for this stuff. And I think that's the big problem that the beef industry in general, I think this whole industry has really suffered from a lack of a very high level coordinated advertising and marketing campaign, collectively, because we see this fake meat being very funded by Silicon Valley, and they've got their
we're going to be doing a webinar. Don't hold me to it. You'll have to look at it'll be either in November or early December, but Sarah Keough is going to be putting it on, addressing this fake meat, what's really in it. And she's a clinical nutritionalist, some amazing research she's done. But that'll be a great webinar we're providing to producers and consumers to self-educate themselves about what's occurring. And, we've got to be cautious. And I mean, of what we're putting in our bodies. When you look at some of those food labels, it's very concerning. And good food shouldn't have 20 items listed on the back of the label of what's in it. And I mean, that's all there is to it. And your body, and that's what's pretty amazing is, and it took me a long time to think about stuff like this, but if you've ever been dog sick and you start feeling a little bit better, what's the first thing your body tells you it craves? You kind of identify those things, and that's called cellular memory, organ memory, of your body communicating with you about what it needs to fix itself, heal itself. And that's some pretty amazing stuff we're looking into right now. And I think that's what this regenerative is all about, is building that nutrient density back so we can get satiety, fill ourselves on the foods we're eating. And we could do a whole series about that. But I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you folks today, and I look forward to visiting with you more. This is exciting. This is exciting, and I appreciate it.
Well, Shane, and absolutely, and I think the people in here will definitely agree with, once you start filling your body up with nutrition rather than empty food-like substances, your satiety is much improved, your health is improved, and it goes hand in hand. So I think there's definitely some symbiosis between what we're doing here as a health community and what you guys are doing with providing health. So I look forward to more, definitely. Anyway, thank you very much. Folks, got to go. I'll see you guys back tomorrow. You guys have a great day, and you guys take care now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.